There's bold, there's crazy, and then there is the absolute, unhinged insanity of a woman who decides she's going to legally steal your grandfather's cabin just to gift wrap it for her unemployed, 30-year-old son like it's a shiny new toy from a catalog. I'm talking about a woman who looked me in the eye, smiled that tight, plastic smile that never reached her eyes, and essentially told me that my family legacy was now her boy's bachelor pad because she manipulated a few property lines on a piece of paper. But here's the thing about people who build their castles on lies and stolen land. They usually forget to check the foundation of their own house. And in this case, that oversight didn't just cost her the cabin, it cost her everything. And it led to me building the most beautiful, expensive, pettiest fence in the history of property disputes right through the middle of her manicured front lawn. I'm getting ahead of myself, though, because to understand why I spent $5,000 on cedar posts and galvanized steel just to make a point, you have to understand what this cabin meant to me. It wasn't just a structure. It was a sanctuary sitting on the edge of Blackwood Lake, shaded by these massive, ancient oaks that my grandfather, a man named Elias, used to say were the true guardians of the property. He built that place board by board back in the late 80s, measuring twice, cutting once, instilling a sense of patience and craftsmanship in the very bones of the house that you just don't see anymore. I'm a custom woodworker by trade, a path I chose because of him, because of those long, golden summer afternoons sitting on the dock while he taught me how to sand raw timber until it felt like silk, teaching me to read the grain, to respect the material. When he passed and left the place to me, it became my workshop, my retreat, the place where I felt closest to him. And the idea that anyone could look at that history and see nothing but a free real estate upgrade for their kid makes me sick to my stomach even now. The trouble started, as it usually does in these neighborhoods, with a clipboard and a sense of entitlement that could eclipse the sun. Enter Brenda, our homeowners association president, a woman of about 55 who treated the neighborhood bylaws like holy scripture and viewed herself as the high priestess. She lived in this beige, soulless box of a house about 3 lots down from me, but she patrolled the entire shoreline like she was guarding the crown jewels. At first, it was just the usual HOA nonsense that you roll your eyes at, letters about my grass being a 1/4 inch too high, complaints that the stain on my deck was too rustic for the modern aesthetic she was trying to force on a community built in the woods. I brushed it off, paid the petty fines, and tried to stay under the radar because I just wanted to work on my furniture commissions in peace. But then, the visits started getting weirdly personal, and looking back, I should have seen the sharks circling. She'd come by, supposedly to check on compliance issues, but her eyes were always wandering, assessing, calculating. She'd stand on my dock, my grandfather's dock, and make these offhand comments like, this view is really wasted on a single man, don't you think? Or she'd say, my son, Cody, he's just moving back from the city. He's looking for a place where he can really find himself. He loves the water. I'd just nod and try to steer the conversation back to whatever fictional violation she was there to cite me for, not realizing she wasn't making small talk. She was window shopping. And then there was Cody. If Brenda was a hurricane of passive aggression, Cody was a fog of pure entitlement. He was 28, had never held a job for longer than 6 months, and walked around with this air of unearned confidence that usually comes from having a mother who cleans up every mess you ever make. I started finding him on my property when I wasn't there, or even when I was. I'd look out the window of my workshop and see him standing on the end of my dock, hands on his hips, surveying the lake like he was the captain of a ship. One afternoon, I walked out to find him actually measuring the space between the cabin and the water with a tape measure. I asked him, "Can I help you with something, Cody?" And he didn't even look embarrassed. He just grinned this lazy grin and said, "Just checking the potential for a boat lift. Man, Mom says the setbacks here are tricky." I told him to get off my land, that he didn't need to worry about setbacks on a property he didn't own, and he just shrugged and said, "Chill out, dude," just admiring the craftsmanship, before strolling away like he'd just done me a favor. The escalation happened fast after that. Brenda stopped sending letters about grass and started sending letters about historic boundary reviews and title rectification. I'm a woodworker, not a lawyer, so when I got a certified letter claiming that a new digital survey commissioned by the HOA had found a significant discrepancy in the original plat maps from 30 years ago, I thought it was a mistake. I thought it was a clerical error. The letter claimed that my grandfather's cabin, specifically the structure and the dock, had been built 50 feet over the actual property line, placing it squarely on what was designated as HOA common area. I went to Brenda's house, thinking we could talk this out, thinking there was some sanity left in the world. She met me at the door, blocking the entrance, holding a stack of papers that looked terrifyingly official. "It's out of my hands, Mason," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sympathy that is so much worse than anger. "The board has a fiduciary duty to reclaim community assets. It seems your grandfather was, let's say, aggressive with his building plans. The land belongs to the association, and by extension, the structure on it does too." I hired a lawyer, a good one, but Brenda had been busy. She had used her old connections in the county records office. She used to be a real estate paralegal back in the day, to push through a quiet title action while I was busy sanding tables and minding my own business. She had created a paper trail that made it look like the HOA had been contesting this for years, filling the file with backdated complaints and notices I had never received. My lawyer told me, "Mason, this is fraud, absolutely, but unraveling it is going to take months, maybe a year, and until a judge puts a stop to it, the county recognizes the new survey." The nightmare scenario culminated on a Friday. I came home from a supply run to find a locksmith drilling out the deadbolt on my front door. My grandfather's door. A sheriff's deputy was standing there, looking bored, holding a piece of paper that gave the HOA possession of the encroaching structure. I tried to argue. I tried to show them my deed, but the deputy just shook his head and said, "Civil dispute. Son, take it up with the court. Right now the paperwork says you're trespassing." I had to grab my tools. That was all they let me take. I had to pack my grandfather's chisels, his hand planes, my current projects, into my truck while Brenda stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, watching with that satisfied smirk. And standing right next to her, looking like the cat who not only got the cream, but stole the whole dairy farm, was Cody. He was holding a set of keys. New keys. I stayed at a motel that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling a rage so hot I thought I might spontaneously combust. But the real blow came 2 days later. I drove by the property. I couldn't help myself, and saw Cody's car parked in the driveway. He had moved in. 48 hours. They hadn't even pretended to turn it into a community center or a clubhouse. Brenda had leased the unit to her son as a caretaker for the common area asset for something ridiculous like $100 a month. I saw him on the dock. He was drinking coffee. And then I zoomed in with my phone camera, and my heart stopped. He was drinking out of a mug. A ceramic mug with the initials EM carved into the bottom. It was my grandfather's favorite mug. I had left it in the cabinet because in the rush, I thought I'd be back in a few days. Watching that entitled parasite sipping his morning brew from the cup my grandfather held every morning for 20 years, that broke something in me. It broke the part of me that wanted to be civil, the part of me that believed in taking the high road. I called my lawyer and told him to go nuclear, but he gave me the same speech. The wheels of justice turned slow. Mason, I didn't want slow. I wanted immediate. I wanted scorched earth. And that's when I remembered something my grandfather told me about boundaries. He said, "Mason, a line on a map is just an idea until you build a fence on it. Then it's a fact." I started digging, not into the ground, but into the records. If Brenda wanted to play games with surveys and inches and historic plat maps, I was going to become a scholar of the subject. I hired an independent surveyor, a guy named Old Mr. Henderson from 3 towns over who had been surveying this county since before Brenda was born and who hated HOA politics more than he hated poison ivy. I paid him triple his rate to survey not just my land, but the entire shoreline, specifically the common areas that Brenda was so concerned with reclaiming. Mr. Henderson spent 3 days out there with his equipment, dodging Brenda's attempts to shoo him away. She kept screaming that he wasn't authorized, but he just chewed on his cigar and told her that public records are public for a reason. When he came to my temporary workshop, a friend's garage, with the results, he had a grin on his face that looked like a cracked walnut. "Son," he said, unrolling the big map, "you ain't gonna believe this. Your granddaddy's cabin? It's borderline. It's messy. We can fight it, but it's a gray area. But you know what ain't a gray area?" He tapped a thick red line he had drawn on the map. "The president's house." I looked closer. According to the original development charter, the one filed in 1975 that superseded all the nonsense Brenda had filed recently. There was a designated scenic easement intended for a walking path that ran parallel to the road. It was HOA common property, legally owned by every member of the association. And Brenda, in her infinite wisdom and arrogance, had extended her front lawn, her paved walkway, her expensive retaining wall, and her prized rose garden right over that easement. Her house was technically sitting 15 feet back from where she acted like her property line was. Her entire front yard, the entrance to her home, was legally common ground. And as a dues-paying member of the HOA, because they were still charging me dues even while stealing my house, I had every right to access and improve the common area. I felt a smile spread across my face that probably looked a little unhinged. I asked Mr. Henderson, "Can I build a fence on the property line? The real property line?" He laughed. "If it's on the line, and it's on common ground, and you're a member, I don't see why not. Just make sure it's up to code." I didn't just build a fence. I built a monument. I went to the lumber yard and bought the clearest, most beautiful cedar posts money could buy. I bought heavy-duty galvanized panels. I designed a fence that was 6 feet tall, solid wood, absolutely unclimbable, and completely visually obstructing. I waited for a Tuesday morning when I knew Cody was sleeping off a hangover in my cabin and Brenda was at her weekly hair appointment. I brought a crew, 3 guys I work with who move fast and ask few questions. We arrived at 8 a.m. By 10 a.m., the post holes were dug. We were mixing concrete when Brenda's car pulled up. It was glorious. She got out of her car, coffee in hand, and dropped the cup. It splashed all over her beige shoes. What are you doing?" she shrieked, running over, waving her hands like she was trying to stop a plane from taking off. "You can't be here. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." I didn't stop mixing the concrete. I just looked up, wiped some sweat off my forehead, and said, "Morning, Brenda. Just doing some community service. I realized we've been neglecting the scenic easement. I wanted to make sure the boundaries were clearly marked. You know how important boundaries are to you." "This is my front yard," she screamed, her face turning a color of purple I've only seen on bruised plums. "You are destroying my property." "Actually," I said, pulling the certified survey map from my back pocket and holding it up, "according to the county deed office and the 1975 charter, your property starts 15 feet back. Right about there." I pointed to a spot about 3 feet from her front porch steps. "Everything I'm standing on, common area. And as a member, I'm building a security fence to protect the community assets. I'm sure you understand." The deputies showed up about 20 minutes later, summoned by her frantic 911 call claiming a violent intruder. When they arrived, I was calmly leveling a post. It was the same deputy from the eviction. He looked at me, looked at the fence, looked at the screaming woman. I handed him the survey. I handed him the HOA bylaws, which stated any member could improve common areas with temporary or permanent structures if it served a safety purpose. "There's a steep drop-off over there," I lied, pointing to a gentle slope. "Safety fence." The deputy studied the map. He looked at Brenda's house. He looked at the line. He started to chuckle. He tried to hide it, but he couldn't. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her, "according to this, he's on public HOA land. And technically, your rose bushes are trespassing." Brenda went silent. It was the silence of a balloon that has just been popped. She realized, in that moment, that she had opened a door she couldn't close. By legitimizing the strict enforcement of property lines to steal my cabin, she had weaponized the very thing that was now going to strangle her. We finished the fence by sunset. It was a masterpiece. It ran directly across the front of her lot, completely cutting off her driveway from her house and blocking the path to her front door. To get to her house, she would have to park on the street, walk around the side of the fence through a muddy ditch, and enter through her side garage door. It turned her million-dollar view into a view of a cedar wall. But that was just the beginning. The fence was the signal flare. The neighbors, who had been terrified of Brenda for years, saw that big wooden middle finger standing in her yard, and they woke up. They saw that the emperor wasn't just naked. She was trespassing. My lawyer used the momentum. We filed an emergency injunction, using the proof of her bad faith boundary manipulation with her own property to cast doubt on the survey she used to steal mine. A judge took one look at the 2 conflicting surveys, the fraudulent one she commissioned and the certified historical one I provided. and paused everything. But the real poetic justice came from the community. A group of neighbors, emboldened by the fence of justice, as they started calling it, launched an audit of the HOA financials. You see, stealing a cabin requires legal fees, surveyor fees, filing fees. Brenda hadn't paid for that out of her pocket. She had drained the HOA reserve fund to pay for her personal vendetta and her son's new clubhouse. That's embezzlement. That's a felony. The police raid happened 2 weeks later. I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, parked on the street, perfectly legal, polishing a piece of trim on the fence, when I saw the cars roll up. Not patrol cars. Unmarked sedans. State investigators. They walked right past my fence, around the muddy ditch, and banged on her side door. They let her out in handcuffs. She wasn't wearing her pantsuit. She was wearing sweatpants, and she looked old. She looked tired. She looked like someone who realized too late that you don't throw stones when you live in a glass house, or a house built on common land. And Cody? The moment the money tap turned off and the cops showed up, he evaporated. He left my cabin in the middle of the night. I got the keys back from the sheriff after the judge overturned the eviction order, ruling the transfer fraudulent and malicious. Walking back into that cabin was the hardest and best moment of my life. It smelled like stale beer and cheap cologne. There were stains on the rug, but my grandfather's tools were still there. And sitting on the counter, unwashed, was the mug. I washed that mug for about 20 minutes. I scrubbed it until my hands were raw. And then I made a pot of coffee, walked out to the dock, and sat there. The sun was coming up over the water, hitting the oak trees just right, turning the leaves into gold. The legal fallout was catastrophic for Brenda. She faced charges for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. She had to sell her house to pay the restitution and legal fees. But here is the kicker. Because of the fence, the property value of her house tanked. Nobody wanted to buy a house where the front door was blocked by a spite fence that was legally untouchable. She had to sell it for a fraction of what it was worth, mostly to an investor who planned to tear it down. She ended up moving to a small apartment in the next town over. I saw her once at the grocery store. She was arguing with a cashier about a coupon that had expired. She saw me, and for a second, I saw that old spark of arrogance, that desire to demand to see a manager. But then she remembered. She remembered the fence. She remembered the jail cell. And she just looked down and walked away. As for the fence, the new HOA board voted to keep it. They put a little plaque on it. It doesn't say revenge. It says Community Boundary Marker, established 2024. It's a reminder that rules apply to everyone. A reminder that you don't mess with a man's sanctuary. And a reminder that if you push a quiet craftsman too far, he won't just get mad. He'll get measuring tape, he'll get concrete, and he'll build a monument to your stupidity right on your front lawn. I'm back in the shop now. I'm working on a new dining table for a couple down the street. The wood is walnut, dark and rich. It takes patience to work walnut. You can't rush it. You have to respect the grain, just like you have to respect people. So, I have to ask you guys, what would you have done? Would you have let it go? Would you have waited for the courts? Or would you have dug those post holes and poured that concrete? I know some people say an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, but in my experience, sometimes an eye for an eye just makes the other guy see clearly for the first time in his life. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever dealt with an HOA tyrant like Brenda? Did you find a way to beat them at their own game? I read every comment, usually while drinking coffee on my dock, listening to the water lap against the pilings, finally, peacefully, alone. Thanks for listening, and remember, check your property lines, keep your grandfather's tools sharp, and never, ever let someone steal your peace. Stay safe out there.